I remember getting really thirsty one May afternoon as I was floating on the bottom of a boat down the Delaware Bay, hoping to God that some rescue ship would show up out of thin air. And there was water everywhere. But I told you the story, and I told the kids the first week in Bible school about being out hiking in a state park south of Dallas and running into a rattlesnake friend who didn't appear friendly. The truth is that rattlesnake, when all was said and done, was less of a danger to me than the fact that I had gotten lost on a hike and had insufficient water in 96-degree heat. By the time I found my way out to a campsite with water, and I drank as much as I possibly could, I just collapsed, and it took me a good hour to find a way to get enough energy to walk the last mile to the car. I was so thirsty when I got to that water fountain. And the water was hot, and it didn't matter. I remember being hungry. I'd taken a course, actually up in Akron, Ohio. The Alban Institute had offered a course, and it was planning for a long-term pastorate. And I went and expected to get all these great pointers, and instead was taking through a number of days of spiritual disciplines, among those fasting. And so the first Holy Week I came to, I'd been doing some teaching in Lent on some of these, as I have here. And I invited anybody in the congregation who wanted to join me during Holy Week to enter the fast, to begin the day after Palm Sunday. And we were choosing to break the fast on that Saturday morning breakfast together. It was so interesting how many fantasies someone can have about food. The reflections on what food means to human beings, and an awareness of how many people in the world in which we live have no food. And you begin thinking about those things, and you begin feeling the pains and the weakness. And I was so glad when Saturday morning got there. Unfortunately, my brain is wired in such a way it plays a cruel trick, because whenever I fast, the brain shuts off. I don't know why. I've never run into anybody who had this experience. It shuts off my taste buds. So for 2 days, I panic when I start eating because I can't taste anything. That's a scary thought. I could lose some weight. Hungering, thirsting, basic human needs. Jesus picked those up wonderfully and says, "Blessed are those who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness." Some have treated this as if it's somehow a personal desire to do right. That, we get inspired and we go forth and we make New Year's resolution, and so we're going to do better. Today's English version translates it, "Happy are those whose greatest desire is to do what God requires." That's not exactly what this text is about as Jesus is teaching it. It's not just about us deciding we're going to do better. This is best contextualized by a piece from Isaiah. Sometimes I like to put my Bible out here so I can lift it up and look like Billy Graham. Listen to me, you that pursue righteousness, you that seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug. Listen to me, you who know righteousness, you people who have my teaching in your hearts. Do not fear the reproach of others, and do not be dismayed when they revile you. Well, I won't go into all the gory details of what will happen to them. You get the drift. It's that righteousness that goes back to the Hebrew Scriptures' understanding of righteousness. What it is that God wills and what God wants and what our part in that is. This yearning that's built within us that we try to quell. This hungering and thirsting, and we try to wonder what it is, and we read self-help books, and we try to figure this thing out because it is inherently a part of how we are made. Isn't it interesting that this reference to God's righteousness falls halfway through the Beatitudes, and the next time we're going to run into it is just a few weeks away, and it will come back at the very end, as if to reinforce what Jesus wants those listening to really hear and to get. The Greek word, the dikaiosune, is a word that we translate as righteousness, but maybe a better understood translation would be justice. Now, I always lift up that because in this country, we hear justice as J-U-S-T, U-S. Justice is what God has seen and envisioned for all of creation. We mishear this word because we have been raised in good citizenship courses, which of course they no longer teach. But anybody else here? I got grades in citizenship. It's about the only thing that I got a decent grade in because my mom taught me to be polite, right? We equate justice, and we mishear this reading because we've been brought up that justice is related to a legal system with flawed human beings who have been elected to office pass laws, and therefore it's called a justice system. That's not God's righteousness. No matter where you travel, no matter what land you're in, human beings are determining, as they see it by their lights, what laws should be. That does not make the laws categorically just. Richard Rohr, the Franciscan priest, writes, "To live a just life in the world is to identify with the longings and the hungering of the poor and the meek and those who weep." So what Jesus is doing at this place in the Beatitude is saying, have you listened to the first three Beatitudes? Because if you have, you know that it's connected to God's righteousness, entering into those who live on the edges, whom God cares for so deeply. The identification with those, being in solidarity with them, it is in itself a profound sense of social justice. But there are so many issues, so much injustice, so many things that anger us, so many things that we want to tackle. And I hear this conversation take place often in the media. And I read articles where it talks about compassion fatigue. And people are immobilized in some ways. They are frozen because they are overwhelmed by the issues, and they only have so much compassion to pass out to all the pain in the world. But when we look for where the Spirit moves in the hearts and souls of faithful people, we can be energized by the blowing of the Spirit of God as we go about doing our work, the good work of trying to build up the realm of God on earth so that others could experience the true will of God on earth. There is an energizing in that process, being in that community. John Deere, another Catholic, writes, Jesus instructs us to be passionate for social, economic, and crucial justice. That's the meaning of the Hebrew word for justice and the Jewish insistence on it. Seek justice, Jesus is trying to say to us, as if it's your food. Seek justice as if it is the drink you need in the middle of the desert. As if it's your bread, as if it's your water, as if it's a matter of life and death, which it is ultimately. Those of us who live our lives committed to the struggle of Jesus, committed to the struggle that Jesus says is a commitment that must be made to those God cares most about. And another translation that I like even better than the one the New RSV puts in, they shall be those who are committed, those who work, those who serve, those who treat it like it's their food and their water, they shall be satisfied. It doesn't say that we will experience compassion fatigue, but be satisfied. It doesn't say that we will go through life with hurt feelings and whining because people don't like our values and our opinions. It says those who seek the righteousness of God, who hunger and thirst for it, will be satisfied. It doesn't say that we're going to win every struggle as the people of faith that we engage in. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to come around to see our way and agree on what it is that we believe the Scriptures have to teach and how we need to conduct ourselves. But it does mean when we're committed to the struggle that we will be satisfied. We read these texts and we scratch our head, and I have said from the beginning, we think that these are nice, polite courtesies that Jesus is lifting up. When in essence, what Jesus is trying to say to those who are here, you know what God is up to? You know what God ultimately plans? God ultimately is planning to bring about God's righteousness, God's justice in this upside-down world where there are so many egomaniacs around the world who look out only for themselves while the many suffer. Jesus could say this because, after all, for the people occupied for the Romans, Caesar was the ultimate egomaniac. Caesar did represent all that the Jews found detestable. The heavy hand, the control. We'll get to that later on the peacemaker's part. Jesus says to those who will listen, hey, the realm of God are those that are blessed because the hunger and the thirst never leaves you alone and never goes away. But if you persist, if you run your course, if you do what God asks of you, ultimately in that journey, you will be filled. filled. I used to eat lots of my mama's bananas, and I would eat it. She'd fix it when I come home, and fried pies, and I'd come and I'd eat, and it was just like, ah. No matter how much I ate, I never really got satisfied. I always just wanted more. I have had experiences and places where I would like to go back and recreate those experiences while I know I never can. But I never was completely satisfied. No, it's the hungering and the thirsting and the seeking that leads me, you, those throughout the ages who followed, to ultimately be satisfied. Blessed are you who hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake. For you will be filled in the best way possible.